The assembly hall of Karen Prime had been designed for stability. Not comfort, not beauty, stability. Every line of its architecture, every angle of its walls, every material chosen for its construction had been selected with one purpose in mind: to create a space where decisions that affected entire civilizations could be made without distraction, without distortion, without emotion interfering more than it absolutely had to. It had worked. For a long time, it had worked. The hall had seen border disputes resolved between species that shared nothing but proximity. It had seen trade agreements signed that kept entire star systems alive. It had seen wars prevented before they began, ended before they spread, contained before they became something worse. It had also seen failure, quiet failure, gradual failure, the kind that did not announce itself with alarms or explosions, but instead accumulated slowly, decision by decision, until it became impossible to point to the exact moment things had gone wrong. Today was not one of those quiet failures. Today, the failure was visible. It hung in the center of the hall as a three-dimensional projection, large enough that every delegate, no matter where they stood, could see it without needing to focus. A map, not symbolic, not simplified, accurate. Every system, every colony, every inhabited region within the known boundaries of Allied space. And the colors were the problem. 43 years ago, the map had been predominantly blue. Blue indicated controlled territory, stable territory, systems that were populated, defended, and functioning within the framework that the assembly existed to maintain. Now, nearly half of it was red. No one had needed to explain what red meant. Red meant lost, not contested, not under threat, lost. The transition from blue to red did not happen dramatically. There were no flashing indicators, no sudden shifts. Systems changed color the way erosion reshaped a coastline. Slowly, steadily, in a direction that never reversed. A system would hold for years, sometimes decades. Then, over the course of a single cycle, it would fail. And it would not come back. The delegates stood in their assigned positions along the upper ring of the chamber, each platform calibrated to the environmental needs of its occupants. Atmospheric density, light spectrum, gravity variance, each carefully adjusted so that no species could claim disadvantage. It was one of the assembly's proudest achievements. It did not matter. At the center of the hall, a single figure stood beneath the projection, its light reflecting faintly off the polished surface of the floor. Ambassador Telverin had rehearsed this moment. Not the words. The words were simple. The composure. That was what required rehearsal. He stood with his hands loosely clasped behind his back, posture straight, expression controlled. To an outside observer, he might have appeared calm. He was not calm. He had not been calm for 17 years. Current territorial loss, he said, his voice carrying evenly across the chamber, assisted by a translation system that rendered his speech simultaneously into 11 different linguistic frameworks, stands at 48% of total inhabited Alliance space. He paused. Not for effect, for accuracy. Projected loss rate, he continued, has increased by 12% over the last standard decade. No one interrupted. No one asked for clarification. They already knew. They had seen the reports. They had watched the map change. Based on current expansion patterns, Telverin said, the opposing force will achieve irreversible positional advantage within 13 to 16 standard years. The words settled into the room. They did not echo. The hall had been designed to prevent that. There was no need for repetition. Every being present understood exactly what had just been said. Irreversible. Not difficult to recover. Not costly to reverse. Irreversible. Telverin allowed his gaze to move across the assembled delegates. Different species, different histories, different ways of processing what they were hearing. Some stood completely still, their forms rigid, conserving energy as they analyzed the implications. Others shifted slightly, small movements betraying discomfort or calculation or both. A few had lowered their gaze not out of submission, but out of habit, the instinct to look away from something that could not be immediately fixed. He did not blame them. There was nothing in the data that suggested this could be fixed. We have attempted, he said carefully. All standard countermeasures. A subtle understatement. We have reinforced defensive lines. We have increased production capacity. We have coordinated multi-species fleet operations at unprecedented scale. All true. All insufficient. The result, he said, remains unchanged. He turned slightly, just enough to gesture toward the projection. A section of the map expanded, highlighting a cluster of systems near the current frontier. The red there was newer, brighter, recent losses. Engagement outcomes remain consistent across all fronts, he said. The enemy advances. We delay. The line moves. He let that sit for a moment. Then, more quietly, it has only ever moved in one direction. That was the part no one wanted to say out loud. Not because it was untrue, because saying it made it final. Telvaren straightened slightly, a small adjustment, almost imperceptible. The Assembly, he said, returning to a more formal tone, has convened this session to determine whether any non-standard strategies remain available. A pause. A longer one this time. Not for accuracy, for honesty. Because, he added, if none do, then we are no longer discussing how to win this war. No one moved. No one spoke. The projection hovered silently in the center of the chamber, half blue, half red, and changing. So slowly it could not be seen in real time, but quickly enough that everyone in the room knew what it would look like tomorrow. We are discussing how long it will take to lose it. No one responded immediately, not because there was nothing to say, because anything that could be said had already been said. Just not all at once, not this clearly, not in a single statement that removed the last remaining space for interpretation. In the silence that followed, the projection in the center of the chamber shifted again. Not dramatically, just enough. A new layer of data unfolded across the map. Thin lines, faint markers, numerical overlays that began to populate system by system. Logistics routes, fleet movements, attrition curves. The kind of information that did not inspire hope even when it was favorable, and was devastating when it was not. A second figure stepped forward from the upper ring. Strategist Haven Creel did not look at the delegates. He looked at the data. He always did. Clarification, he said, his voice precise, almost clinical. The previous statement summarizes outcome probability. I will provide supporting structure. No one objected. They would not have, even if they could. Creel extended one hand toward the projection. At his gesture, the map divided. On one side, Alliance forces. On the other, the opposing advance. Fleet parity, he began, was achieved 12 standard years ago. A line appeared between the two halves of the projection, balanced. Equal. For a moment, the image looked stable. Then it shifted. Fleet parity, Creel continued, was lost 9 years ago. The opposing side expanded slightly. Not overwhelmingly. Just enough. Resource parity, he said, was lost 7 years ago. The shift became more noticeable. Production parity was lost 5 years ago. Now the difference was undeniable. Not catastrophic, but trending. Always trending. Repair cycle efficiency differential, Creel said, currently favors the opposing force by approximately 31%. A new set of figures appeared. Ships lost. Ships repaired. Time required. Time available. The gap widened. Operational tempo, he added, remains consistently higher on their side of the conflict. He paused, adjusting the data layers again. Lines representing movement appeared, flowing forward, system by system. Alliance movement lines flickered. Reactive. Irregular. The opposing lines did not flicker. They advanced. Steady. Predictable. Relentless. Engagement analysis across the last 4 decades, Creel said, indicates a consistent pattern. He did not look up. He did not need to. Alliance forces engage. Defensive posture established. Opposition applies sustained pressure. Defensive integrity degrades. Position is abandoned. The projection demonstrated it. Over and over. Different systems. Same outcome. Different commanders. Same result. different tactics, same direction, forward, always forward. The rate of advance, Creel said, is not dependent on tactical superiority in individual engagements. That caused a slight shift among the delegates. Not disagreement, recognition. It is dependent, he continued, on system-level consistency. He isolated a section of the map, zoomed in, highlighted. Every time we reinforce a position, he said, we commit resources to holding it. The numbers appeared. Ships, personnel, energy allocation, supply-demand. Every time they apply pressure, he said, they test the limit of that commitment. More numbers, smaller, more efficient, more focused. When the limit is reached, Creel said, the system fails. The highlighted system turned red. The delegates did not react. They had seen it before. Then they repeat the process, he said. Another system, another shift, another loss. Creel let the projection run. It did not need narration. It spoke in patterns. Total Alliance ship count, he said after a moment, remains within viable operational thresholds. Another pause. This one mattered. Individually, that word changed everything. A new overlay appeared. Combined fleet projection. Every species, every ship, everything that could be mobilized. The number rose. Impressive. Significant. For a brief moment, the visual suggested strength. Then the opposing projection appeared beside it. Larger. Not by an overwhelming margin. But enough. Always enough. Maximum unified deployment, Creel said. Achieves temporary equilibrium. The two projections aligned. For a moment, perfectly balanced. Temporary, he repeated. The alignment broke. The opposing side edged forward again. Not faster. Just longer. They do not require superiority at every moment, Creel said. They require consistency over time. He let that settle. They have it. Silence. Then one of the delegates, tall, rigid, voice low, spoke from the upper ring. And we do not? Creel finally looked up. Not at the speaker. At the room. No, he said. There was no hesitation. No attempt to soften it. We do not. He turned back to the projection. Combined fleet deployment, he continued, introduces coordination inefficiencies, new data, command delays, translation lag, doctrinal conflicts, response mismatches. 11 species, he said, operate under 11 command structures. The numbers reflected it. Reaction time increased. Precision decreased. Optimal coordination, he said, has never been achieved. Another understatement. Projected engagement outcome under maximum deployment conditions, Creel said, results in initial stabilization followed by gradual positional loss. The map demonstrated it. The line held. Briefly. Then it moved. Forward. Always forward. He closed his hand. The projection froze. Half blue. Half red. Unbalanced. Inevitable. For clarity, Creel said, his voice as even as it had been from the beginning. There is no combination of currently available resources, strategies, or deployments that produces a model in which the Alliance achieves sustained reversal of the opposing advance. No one interrupted. No one argued. Because this was not opinion. This was math. The best-case scenario, he added, is delay. A longer silence. Then, worst-case scenario, someone said quietly. Creel did not need to check the data. He already knew. There is no meaningful distinction, he said. The words landed harder than anything before them, because they removed the last illusion. Not hope. Hope had already been fading. Control. Control was gone. The projection dimmed slightly, its light softening as if the system itself understood that it had completed its purpose. No alarms. No warnings. Just a conclusion. Unavoidable. Unarguable. Final. Tel Varen remained at the center of the chamber, hands still clasped behind his back. He had heard all of this before, in reports, in briefings, in fragments, but hearing it like this, clean, structured, complete, was different. He looked once more at the map, at the red, at the slow, steady arithmetic of loss. Then he spoke again, quietly. "So," he said, "we are in agreement." No one responded. They did not need to. "We cannot win this war," he said. This time, the silence that followed was not analytical. It was acceptance. And in that moment, when every mind in the room arrived at the same conclusion, something changed. Not in the data, not in the map, in the question. Because if the outcome was certain, then the only remaining variable was this. What could possibly justify continuing? The silence did not break all at once. It fractured. Slowly at first, one voice, then another, then several speaking over each other in controlled tones that were just restrained enough to remain within protocol, but no longer calm. The assembly had reached its conclusion, and now it had to respond to it. One by one, the delegations began to speak. Not with hope, with obligation. A tall representative from the northern sectors stepped forward first, their voice steady, their posture rigid with the kind of discipline that came from generations of military tradition. "Our fleets," they said, "will commit an additional 300 vessels to the outer defensive line." A number appeared beside their sector on the projection. It was significant. It did not change the balance. Another delegation followed. "We will redirect our production capacity entirely toward warship construction. Civilian output will be reduced by 70%. More numbers, more sacrifice, still not enough." A third voice. "Our reserves will be released. Fuel, munitions, all of it. We will sustain maximum operational output for as long as possible." The projection updated again. The total rose. It looked impressive. It looked like effort. It did not look like victory. Around the chamber, the pattern continued. Every species, every system, each one offering what they could. Ships, resources, time, everything they had left. And every addition, every increase, every sacrifice pushed the total higher. But never far enough. The delegates could see it. They did not need it explained. The combined projection hovered in the center of the hall, numbers climbing steadily, approaching the threshold that had already been defined as insufficient. A coordinated force of unprecedented scale. Still losing, still reacting, still following the same pattern. Contribute, hold, break, retreat, repeat. Telverin watched it all from the center of the chamber. He did not interrupt. There was no point. This was not strategy. This was ritual. The ritual of people who understood they were out of options, but continued to act because not acting would mean admitting something none of them were prepared to say aloud. Eventually, the voices slowed, then stopped. The projection stabilized. A final number. Large. Impressive. Meaningless. No one said that part. They did not need to. There was one platform that had not spoken. It sat along the eastern arc of the chamber. Unadorned. No elaborate symbols. No environmental adjustments beyond the standard baseline. The human delegation. They had been present for the entire session. Silent. Observing. The representative stood only after the last contribution had been logged. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. He simply moved. Ambassador Elias Wren descended from the platform and stepped onto the central floor with the same measured pace he had maintained throughout the entire assembly. He was not physically imposing, not particularly tall, not armored, not decorated. His clothing was plain, deliberately so, and yet, when he reached the center of the chamber, every voice stopped, not because he demanded it, because something about his presence suggested that interruption would be a mistake. He did not look at the delegates. He looked at the projection, at the numbers, at the final tally of everything the Alliance had just committed. Then he spoke. "The human coalition," he said, his voice even, unhurried, carrying across the hall without strain, "will contribute one vessel." For a moment, no one reacted, not because they had accepted it, because they had not processed it. The translation systems rendered the statement across 11 languages. Each one identical, each one clear. One vessel. The silence that followed was not the same silence that had filled the chamber before. That silence had been heavy. This one was sharp, confused, almost disbelieving. A delegate near the western arc leaned forward slightly, their posture tightening. "Clarify," they said. Ren did not turn. "One vessel," he repeated. The words did not change. The tone did not change. The meaning did not change. Another voice, more controlled, more deliberate. "This assembly has just committed the combined strength of 11 civilizations." Ren nodded once. "I am aware. And your contribution," the voice continued carefully, "is one ship. Yes. No elaboration. No apology. No adjustment. Just confirmation." A subtle shift rippled through the chamber. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to disbelief searching for a place to land. Tel Varen stepped forward slightly. He did not raise his voice. He did not challenge. He asked, "Ambassador Ren," he said, "is this a symbolic gesture?" Ren finally looked away from the projection. Not at the speaker. At the room. "No," he said. The answer came without hesitation. Without emphasis. As if the possibility had not required consideration. "It is operational." That word changed the air. Operational. Not symbolic. Not political. Functional. A third voice entered. Sharper now, less controlled. "One vessel cannot alter the outcome parameters we have just established." Ren's expression did not shift. "I agree," he said. The delegates paused. That was not the answer they had expected. A brief, almost imperceptible crease of confusion passed through several of them. "You agree?" someone said. "Yes." Ren's gaze returned to the projection. "To be clear," he said calmly, "one vessel, applied within the framework we have been discussing, would not produce a different outcome." The room tightened, because that meant he understood. He understood the math. He understood the failure. And he was still saying it. "Then why?" A voice began. Ren raised a hand. Not sharply. Just enough. The voice stopped. "We are not contributing within that framework," he said. The words landed softly, but they did not dissipate. They held. Because they introduced something that had not been present in the conversation until now. A deviation. Not more resources. Not more force. Something else. Tel Varen studied him carefully. "For clarity," he said, "you are proposing an alternative approach?" Ren considered that for a moment. Then, "No." Another pause. Another fracture in expectation. "We are not proposing," he said. "We are proceeding." The distinction was subtle, but it mattered. Proposals could be debated, adjusted, delayed. Proceeding meant it was already in motion. A flicker of tension moved through the chamber. "When?" someone asked. Ren did not check anything. He already knew. "The vessel will arrive within 6 standard cycles." "And its designation?" Tel Varen asked. Ren held his gaze for a moment, then answered, "CNS Bastion's Edge." The name did not mean anything to most of the room. Not yet. "That is insufficient," another delegate said sharply. "This assembly requires full disclosure of operational capabilities before." "You will receive what you need," Ren said. Not dismissive. Not aggressive. Final. The delegate stopped speaking. Not because they agreed. Because something in the way he said it suggested the conversation was no longer theirs to control. Ren turned away from the projection. Without waiting for permission. Without offering anything further. He walked back toward the human platform and sat down. The chamber remained silent, but it was no longer the silence of defeat. It was something else now, something unsettled, because for the first time in the entire session, something had entered the equation that the math did not account for. And no one in the room, not the strategists, not the commanders, not the analysts, could yet determine whether that made the situation better or much, much worse. The first record of the Bastion's Edge in the Assembly archives was incomplete. That, in itself, was not unusual. Military vessels, especially those classified under independent command, often carried restricted files. Specifications were segmented. Capabilities redacted. Access granted only under specific conditions. But even within those standards, this file was thin. Clerk Unit 7 Delta had processed military entries for 12 standard years. In that time, it had developed a reliable sense for what a complete file looked like. This was not one of them. It stared at the entry for several seconds longer than necessary. Designation: CNS Bastion's Edge. Class: Penitent Class Siege Vessel. Crew complement: 812. Status: Active. No extended description. No weapons summary. No deployment history. Just the outline. As if the rest of it had been deliberately not written down. 7 Delta adjusted its interface parameters, requesting auxiliary data layers. Access denied. It tried again, rerouting through a secondary authorization path. Access denied. Paused. Not because it was incapable of continuing, because something about the file suggested that continuing would not produce more information, only more denials. At the bottom of the entry, there was a note, added 19 years prior. It was the only line in the file that felt human. Administrative notice: do not initiate decommission inquiries. Previous attempts resulted in operational complications. 7 Delta processed the sentence, then processed it again. Operational complications was not a standard classification. It was vague, deliberately so, which meant whoever had written it had chosen vagueness over clarity, which meant the clarity was probably worse. The clerk closed the file. It had other entries to process. More ships, more numbers, more contributions that followed known patterns. But for the remainder of its operational cycle, a small portion of its processing capacity remained occupied with a single unresolved question. What kind of vessel required a warning like that? 5 standard cycles later, the Bastion's Edge entered the system. It did not announce itself. That was the first anomaly. Standard protocol required identification signals well before arrival. A vessel entering a staging zone of this scale, this density, would normally transmit approach vectors, authentication codes, coordination requests. The Bastion's Edge transmitted none of them. And yet, it appeared. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just there. At the outer edge of sensor range. The first detection came from a peripheral array, one of the less prioritized systems, calibrated for deep field observation rather than close-range tracking. It registered mass, then structure, then presence. By the time the primary arrays adjusted to confirm the reading, the ship was already inside the boundary. That was the second anomaly. Admiral Kareth did not look up from the display immediately. He had seen thousands of ships enter staging systems. Patterns repeated. Protocol held. Nothing about arrivals surprised him anymore. Identification, he said. The response came back half a second later. Confirmed, his tactical officer said. CNS Bastion's Edge. Kareth nodded once. Delay on signal acquisition? A pause. Negative, sir. That made him look up. Clarify. The officer hesitated just briefly. The signal did not delay, they said. It was absent. Kareth studied the display now. The ship's outline had resolved. Angular. Heavy. Not elegant. Human vessels, as a general rule, favored clean lines. Smooth hull curvature. Even when unnecessary, there was a tendency toward design symmetry, something aesthetic layered over function. This was not that. The Bastion's Edge looked assembled, not constructed. Sections of its hull carried different material signatures, different aging patterns, as if parts of it had been replaced not all at once but over time in pieces. Adapted, modified, kept running. There were structures attached to its exterior that did not match any standard classification. Long, linear extensions running along the ventral side. Clustered nodes near the midsection. None of them aligned with known weapon systems. None of them matched sensor arrays. Analysis, Kareth said. His chief analyst, Varen, leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing as the data streamed across his interface. I don't recognize the configuration, Varen said after a moment. That was not a statement Kareth heard often. Closest match. Varen hesitated. None, he said. Kareth folded his hands behind his back. That was not ideal. Estimate, he said. Varen adjusted the parameters, isolating energy signatures, structural harmonics, emission patterns. They're dormant, he said slowly. Dormant. Yes, sir. Low activity. Minimal output. If they are systems, they are not currently engaged. Kareth watched the ship. It held position. No aggressive posture. No maneuvering. Just there. How long have those structures been part of the hull? Kareth asked. Varen ran another scan. Longer this time. Then, minimum 15 standard years, he said. Kareth did not respond immediately. 15 years. Not new technology. Not experimental deployment. Integrated. Tested. Lived with. Open a channel, Kareth said. The line connected almost instantly. No delay. No negotiation. A voice came through. Calm. Unhurried. Admiral Kareth, it said. Commander Lyra Voss. Bastion's Edge. Kareth inclined his head slightly. Commander, he said. You arrived without transmitting approach protocols. A pause. Not defensive. Not apologetic. We arrived, Voss said. The phrasing was deliberate. Kareth noted it. You will be integrated into the unified command structure, he said. Full operational briefing is scheduled. We'll attend, she said. Again, calm. Unconcerned. As if the structure around her was optional. Kareth allowed a small silence. Testing. Waiting. She did not fill it. That, more than anything else so far, held his attention. Most commanders, when faced with silence from an unfamiliar superior, attempted to resolve it, to explain, to clarify, to assert. She did none of those things. She waited, comfortably. Assemble your senior staff, Kareth said finally. We will review your capabilities. Another pause, slightly longer this time. Then, we'll show you what you need to see, Voss said. The channel closed. Not abruptly, just ended. Kareth remained standing for a moment, looking at the display, at the ship, at the parts of it that did not make sense, at the absence of data where data should have been. Sir, Varen said. Kareth did not look away. Continue analysis, he said. Of what, specifically? Kareth considered that. Then, everything, he said. Across the staging system, tens of thousands of sensors remained fixed on the bastion's edge. They measured, recorded, compared. But there was a problem. The data they collected did not resolve. Not cleanly. Not completely. There were gaps. Small ones. Subtle. The kind that could be dismissed individually. But when viewed together, formed a pattern. Not of presence. Of absence. As if the ship occupied space, but did not fully participate in it. On the outer hull, 2 crew members moved along one of the unidentified structures. Magnetic boots locked to the surface. Movements precise. Familiar. One of them paused, adjusting a panel. Calibrations holding, she said. The other nodded. Told you it would. She laughed. Not loudly. Not nervously. Just casually. Like this was routine. Like they were not surrounded by the combined military force of 11 civilizations preparing for a war they were mathematically certain to lose. Inside the bastion's edge, nothing felt urgent. Nothing felt strained. The crew moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this before. Not once. Not twice. Many times. And somewhere deep within the ship. Behind systems that did not appear on any external scan. Something adjusted. Not in response to the fleet. Not in response to the sensors. But in response to something else entirely. Something only it was tracking. In the command deck, Commander Voss stood in front of a projection. Not of the Alliance map. A different one. Deeper. Redder. Older. Lines traced across it. 6 of them. Converging. Precise. She studied them for a moment. Then said quietly, Status. A voice from behind her. Ready when you are. She nodded once. Not satisfied. Certain. And in that moment, For the first time since the assembly had begun, there existed somewhere in the system a variable the outcome models had not accounted for. Not because it was unknown, because it had never been included. The briefing room had been designed for consensus. Circular table, equal spacing, no elevated positions, no hierarchy implied by architecture. It was meant to encourage cooperation, to prevent dominance, to ensure that every voice carried equal weight. Today, it did not work, because there was only one voice in the room that mattered. Commander Lyra Voss did not sit immediately. She stood at the edge of the table, looking at the projection that hovered above it, the same map that had been displayed in the assembly hall. Blue and red, order and loss, progress and erosion. She studied it in silence. The commanders around the table waited, not patiently, but deliberately. No one wanted to interrupt first. That Kareth noticed was new. He had chaired dozens of briefings like this. Silence usually meant hesitation. This silence meant something else. Finally, Voss spoke. "You're all fighting the same war," she said. There was a pause. Not because the statement was unclear, because it sounded wrong. A Hesh commander leaned forward slightly. "That is generally how wars function," he said. A few subtle reactions around the table. Agreement. Mild irritation. Voss nodded. "Yes," she said. "That's the problem." The room shifted. Just slightly. Kareth folded his hands on the table. "Clarify," he said. Voss turned, not to face him directly, but to face the map. "You're treating this as a territorial conflict," she said. "Space, systems, lines." She gestured toward the red boundary. "You hold positions. They apply pressure. You reinforce. They escalate. Eventually, the system fails." No one disagreed. They couldn't. It was accurate. "That is not a war," Voss said. That got a reaction. A Centauri commander spoke this time. "Then what would you call 60 years of sustained conflict?" Voss didn't look at him. "A process," she said. The word landed oddly. Too small for what they were describing. "A process," she repeated. "That you are participating in." Kareth's gaze sharpened. "And they are not?" he asked. Voss finally looked at him. "No," she said. That answer did not sit well. A few voices started at once. She raised her hand slightly, not to silence, just to slow. "They designed it," she said. The room quieted again. "That was different. They chose the conditions," she continued. "They set the pace. They established the rules of engagement, not formally, but structurally." She moved her hand through the projection. New layers appeared. Supply routes, repair cycles, command relays. "They advance slowly," she said. "Not because they can't move faster, but because moving slowly ensures stability." A line highlighted, flowing, unbroken. "They reinforce continuously," she said. "Not reactively." Another layer. Resource movement. Predictable. Efficient. "They maintain coordination across all fronts," she said. "Without delay." Communication networks lit up across the map. Instant. Synchronized. "And you respond," she said. The word hung there, heavier than it should have been. "Every action you take," she continued, "is in response to something they have already done." Kareth leaned forward slightly. "That is how defensive warfare operates," he said. Voss nodded. "Yes," she said again. Then, "And they are very good at making you defend." That was the first moment something shifted. Not in the room. In the understanding. The Hesh commander frowned slightly. "You're suggesting we abandon defensive positions?" "No," Voss said. "Then what are you suggesting?" She looked back at the map. "At no point in the last 60 years," she said, "have they been forced to respond to you." Silence. Because that was true. Every battle, every engagement, every movement had followed the same pattern. Initiative, pressure, response, loss, repeat. "They have never had to change their plan," Voss said. "Not once." She turned, now fully facing the table. "That is why they're winning. Not strength, not numbers, not even efficiency, consistency, predictability, control. They are solving a problem that does not change, she said. And then, quietly, you are. That landed. Hard. Kareth felt it. Not as an idea, as a realization. We adapt, the Centauri commander said. But there was less certainty in it now. Yes, Voss said. You adapt to them. She stepped closer to the table. They do not adapt to you. The difference was subtle, but absolute. Kareth exhaled slowly. So your solution, he said, is to reverse that. Voss nodded once. We are not going to outproduce them, she said. We are not going to outlast them in a sustained exchange. And we are not going to win by reinforcing the same lines that have already failed. No disagreement. There couldn't be. So we changed the problem, she said. The words were simple. The implication was not. How? Someone asked. Voss did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached out and shifted the projection. The map pulled back. Further. Past the front lines. Past contested systems. Past the areas any alliance ship had operated in for decades. Into deep enemy territory. A region of space that, until now, had been theoretical. Observed. Never touched. This, she said, is where the war actually exists. The room leaned in. Not physically. Mentally. Because this was new. These systems, she continued, highlighting clusters, support their entire forward operation, supply nodes, repair infrastructure, command relays, the backbone, not the front. Everything you have been fighting, she said, is the result of this. The projection pulsed slightly. Cause and effect. Front line and origin. Disconnected. Until now. Kareth felt something shift again. Pattern breaking. You've been trying to stop the outcome, Voss said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. We're going to interfere with the process that creates it. Silence. But not the same silence as before. This one was different, because for the first time since the assembly began, there was something in the room that did not feel like collapse, or delay, or inevitability. Felt like possibility. The Hesh commander spoke again. Quieter now. Even if that's true, he said. We're talking about systems hundreds of light years behind their lines. Voss nodded. Yes. Any force we send will be detected long before it reaches them. Yes. It will be intercepted. Yes. He paused. Then, so how do you propose we reach them? Voss looked at him. Then at the map. Then back at the room. We don't send a force, she said. A beat. Then, we send a problem. That word again. Problem. But now, it meant something different. Not something to solve. Something to introduce. Something they had never faced before. And in that moment, every commander in the room understood something at the same time. They had been asking, how do we fight them? And for the first time, someone had answered a different question. How do we make them fight something they don't understand? No one spoke immediately, not because they disagreed, because they were recalculating everything they thought they understood. Kareth was the first to break the silence. A problem, he repeated. Define it. Voss nodded once, as if she had been expecting that exact question. She turned back to the projection. Show me their logistics network, she said. The system responded instantly. The map shifted again. Layers unfolding like a structure being peeled open. Lines appeared, thin at first, then multiplying. Routes, hundreds of them, interconnected, flowing from deep interior systems toward the front. Materials, fuel, replacement parts, everything required to sustain a war that had never slowed. The commanders watched as the network revealed itself. Not chaotic, not random, organized, optimized, precise. Kareth leaned forward. We've mapped this before, he said. Not like this, Voss replied. She zoomed in. 3 clusters lit up, far behind the front. These are primary repair hubs, she said. Any ship that takes damage rotates through here. The clusters pulsed faintly. Activity levels high. Constant. They don't just replace losses, she continued. They recycle damage. That mattered. A lot. Because it meant they weren't just advancing. They were sustaining. Destroy those, the Centauri commander said immediately. Voss shook her head. No. That answer came fast. Too fast to argue with. They're defended, she said. Heavily. You send a fleet, it gets intercepted before it arrives. She let that settle. Every attempt you've made to strike deep assets has failed for that reason. No one argued. Again, they couldn't. So we don't hit the hubs, she said. She adjusted the map. The focus shifted. Away from the clusters. Into the lines feeding them. Supply arteries. Less protected. Less obvious. More critical than they looked. These, she said quietly. The lines brightened. Highlighted. Flowing into the repair systems. Cut the inputs, she said. And the hubs stop working. Simple. Too simple. Kareth frowned slightly. They will reroute, he said. Yes, Voss said. No hesitation. They'll find alternate paths within 48 hours. She zoomed out again. Expanded the network. Which is why we don't cut one. The map pulsed. 3 separate points lit up along a single major artery. Then, dark. 3 simultaneous disruptions, she said. The flow along that route flickered. Then fractured. Now they reroute, she continued. New lines appeared. Alternate paths. Predictable. Expected. And we cut those too. More points. More darkness. The network started to hesitate. Not collapse, but slow. Unevenly. Like something that had always moved smoothly suddenly encountering resistance. Kareth watched the pattern. He could see it. The ripple effect. How long? He asked. Long enough, Voss said. Not precise, but confident. While they're adjusting, she continued, their repair cycles extend. Numbers appeared. Time delays. Backlog accumulation. Damage not being processed. Frontline ships waiting. Idle. Vulnerable. They don't lose ships immediately, she said. They lose efficiency. That was worse. Because efficiency was what made them unstoppable. Kareth nodded slowly. That degrades their forward strength over time. Yes. But not immediately, the Hesh commander said. Not enough to reverse the line. Voss looked at him. Correct. No defensiveness. No pushback. Agreement. Which made what came next matter more. Which is why that's only the first part. The room tightened again. Because now, they were listening differently. Second layer, Voss said. The projection shifted again. A different network. Not physical this time. Signal lines. Communication relays. Stretching from deep command structures to the front. Continuous. Unbroken. These coordinate their entire advance, she said. Kareth studied the lines. We've tried to jam these, he said. From the outside, Voss replied. Another shift. A section of the network dimmed. Then flickered. Then went unstable. From the inside, she said. That changed everything. The Centauri commander leaned forward. How long can you sustain disruption at that depth? Voss didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced briefly at one of her officers. A silent exchange. Then, long enough, she said again. Same answer. Same confidence. Different context. Kareth didn't press. Because he understood something now. The exact number didn't matter. The effect did. What happens when that link breaks? He asked. Voss moved her hand. The map responded. The front line fractured. Not physically. Logically. Units moved independently. Slight deviations. Timing mismatches. Positioning errors. They lose synchronization, she said. Another shift. Multiple divisions making decisions based only on local data. No central coordination. They stop behaving like one system, she said. Now the effect was clear. Not collapse. Fragmentation. Small mistakes. Then more. Then more. Compounding. They've never had to operate like this, Voss said. That matters. The room was silent. But now, it was focused, sharp, because the plan wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was visible, working. Kareth exhaled slowly. Supply disruption, he said. Communication breakdown. He looked at her. And this is done by one ship. Voss nodded. Yes. Another pause. Then, how? That question mattered. Because now, they believed the plan. But they didn't yet believe the execution. Voss met his gaze. The Bastion's edge does not operate like your fleets, she said. Understatement. It doesn't need to be fast, she continued. It doesn't need to be heavily armed. That caused a slight ripple, because those were standard requirements. What it needs, she said, is to not be where they expect it to be. A beat, then, or detected when it is. That landed. Different. Uncomfortable. Because now they were moving into territory they didn't understand. Passive running, Varen said slowly. Voss didn't confirm. Didn't deny. Low signature, he continued. Reduced emissions. Insufficient, Voss said. Gently. Not dismissing. Correcting. This isn't about being hard to see, she said. It's about not existing in the places they're looking. Silence. Because that was not standard doctrine. At all. Kareth studied her. Longer this time. You're confident this will work, he said. Not a question. An observation. Voss didn't hesitate. Yes. No elaboration. No justification. Just certainty. And somehow, that was enough. Because everything she had shown them, every layer, every step, every effect, fit perfectly. Not as a guess. As a solution. Kareth leaned back slightly. Processing. Rebuilding the war in his head with this new variable inserted. And for the first time, the projection in front of him didn't just show loss. It showed disruption. Possibility. A break in the pattern. When do you begin? He asked. Voss didn't look at the map. She already knew it. 48 hours, she said. Final calibration. Kareth nodded slowly. And the fleet. She looked at him now. Direct. Does nothing, she said. That got a reaction. Immediate. Controlled but real. Nothing? The Centauri commander said. You hold position, Voss said. You maintain presence. She gestured toward the mass of ships outside. They're watching you, she said. Let them. A beat. Every sensor pointed at this fleet is a sensor not pointed somewhere else. That landed clean. Because it made sense. Because it was simple. Because it was right. She stepped back from the table. The projection dimmed slightly. The plan complete. Not complicated. Not overwhelming. Just precise. Before anyone could speak, she added one final line. Quiet. Almost casual. They've never had to be uncertain, she said. Then, they're not going to like it. The Bastion's edge left without being seen. That was not metaphor. It did not accelerate. It did not flare. It did not announce departure in any measurable way. At 2:14 local system time, it was present, locked in position, fully tracked by every major sensor array in the staging zone. At 2:17, it was not. No movement trace. No energy spike. No distortion signature. Nothing. The space it had occupied remained unchanged. Empty. As if it had never been there. Admiral Kareth discovered this at 3:02. Not because of an alert. Because he attempted to open a channel. No response. He tried again. Same result. Status? He asked. His tactical officer hesitated. Last confirmed position. Unchanged. They said. Kareth turned slowly. Then why is it not responding? Another pause. Then, we are not certain it is still there. That got his full attention. Clarify. The officer pulled up the sensor logs. Frame by frame. Timestamp by timestamp. The data shows continuous presence, they said carefully. But there is no independent confirmation of that presence. Kareth narrowed his eyes. You're telling me the record says it's there. But you don't believe it is. Yes, sir. A beat. Why? The officer swallowed slightly. Because the data hasn't changed, they said. Kareth stared at the display. Ships adjusted position constantly. Micro-corrections. Minute shifts. No vessel held perfect stillness over time. It was impossible. And yet, the Bastion's edge had. Perfectly static. For 3 minutes. Then, gone. He exhaled slowly. Time of actual departure? Unknown. That word again. Unacceptable. And yet, accurate. Kareth turned back to the viewport, to the place where the ship had been, then gave the only order that mattered. We hold position. Day 1 passed. Nothing happened. No alarms. No reports. No change. The front line continued its slow, inevitable motion. Red advancing into blue, as it had for decades. The analysts logged routine data. Slight variations. Normal fluctuations. Nothing worth reporting. Day 2. Something shifted. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But in the data. Pratt, the Centauri intelligence analyst, noticed it first. She had been monitoring communication patterns for 11 years. Patterns did not change. Not without cause. She leaned closer to her display. Run comparison, she said. The system complied. Baseline against current. Deviation. 3%. Insignificant. Normally. She frowned. Ran it again. Deviation. 5%. Still small. But increasing. Log it, she said. Not report. Not escalate. Just log. She had learned not to build conclusions on small changes. Not yet. Day 3. The first break appeared. Not at the front. Deep inside enemy space. A supply convoy failed to arrive. No distress signal. No debris. No indication of conflict. Simply, did not reach its destination. The receiving station logged the delay. Adjusted. Requested reroute. Routine. Except, 2 hours later, a second convoy vanished. Different route. Same result. No explanation. Pratt read the incoming translation 3 times. Then sent a single message to Kareth. Unusual logistics interruption detected. Monitoring. No urgency. Not yet. Day 4. The network began to hesitate. 3 major supply arteries reported delays. Minor at first. Then compounding. Reroute protocols activated. Alternate paths engaged. But the timing was off. Each adjustment introduced new delays. Small, but layered. A system designed for certainty was encountering a friction. Pratt leaned back slightly. Now she reported it. This is not random, she said. Kareth studied the data. He could see it. Not failure. Disruption. Exactly where and how Voss had predicted. Day 5. The first clear anomaly appeared. Communication lag. Not loss. Lag. Milliseconds at first. Then seconds. Then minutes. The relay network still functioned. But imperfectly. Messages arrived late. Out of order. Redundant transmissions increased. The pattern was breaking. Kareth stood in the intelligence center watching it unfold. How long? He asked. Pratt checked. Estimated disruption window, 8 to 12 hours so far. Cause? She hesitated. Then, external interference. A pause. Then, internal origin. That mattered. Because it meant, whatever was happening, was inside. Day 6. The eastern flank stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. 11 divisions. Frozen. Holding position. Waiting. For orders that did not arrive. Or arrived too late. Or arrived differently. Kareth watched the display. Lines that had moved forward consistently, predictably, for 60 years, were still. He felt something shift. Not in the data. In himself. Because he had never seen that before. Communication status? He asked. Intermittent, Pratt said. High command signals are not stabilizing. Can they recover it? They're trying. A beat. Unsuccessfully. Then, something else appeared. A signal. Broadcast. Wide spectrum. deep within enemy territory. Not encrypted. Not hidden. Deliberate. Kareth turned sharply. Source. Pratt's fingers moved across her interface. She didn't need long. Bastion's edge, she said. Silence. 'Cause that meant it was still there. Somewhere. Doing exactly what it was designed to do. What is it transmitting? Kareth asked. Pratt looked to her translation team. A young analyst spoke. Slowly. Carefully. As far as we can determine, he said. It is describing the disruptions. Kareth frowned. Explaining them? Yes. In their language? Yes. A pause. Why? The analyst hesitated. Then, it's not just explanation, he said. It's presentation. That word mattered. How so? The analyst checked again. Reading. Rereading. Then, it's giving them their own data, he said. Their losses. Their delays. Their projections. Updated with the new variables. Kareth stared at him. They already have that data. Yes, the analyst said. But not like this. A beat. It's framed. That was the moment. The realization. Voss wasn't just disrupting systems. She was shaping perception. Pratt spoke quietly. They're not used to this, she said. Kareth nodded slowly. No, he said. They're not. He looked at the display. At the stalled front. At the fractured network. At the patterns breaking where they had never broken before. And for the first time, the war did not look inevitable. It looked unstable. Far away. Deep within the disrupted network. The Bastion's edge moved again. Unseen. Untouched. Unstoppable. Not because it was powerful. Because it was precise. And the enemy, for the first time in 60 years, did not know what was happening to them. The enemy did not panic. That was the first thing Kareth noticed. Even as their systems began to fail, slowly, unevenly, in ways that did not match any known pattern, their formations held. Their ships did not scatter. Their lines did not break. There were no sudden retreats, no desperate maneuvers, no signs of fear. They remained, disciplined, controlled, functioning, which made what was happening to them far more dangerous. Status, Kareth said. Pratt didn't look up from her station. Eastern flank remains stationary, she said. Northern and central flanks have reduced forward movement by approximately 58%. Reason? Pratt hesitated. Then, they're waiting. For what? A pause. Clarity, she said. That word carried weight. Because clarity was something they were no longer receiving. The communication network had not failed completely. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, it degraded. Messages arrived late. Or duplicated. Or partially corrupted. Orders contradicted previous orders. Instructions overlapped. Timing broke. Individually, each issue was manageable. Collectively, they created something far more damaging. Uncertainty. Kareth watched the display. 11 divisions along the eastern flank. Each one receiving slightly different information. Each one making decisions based on incomplete data. Each one acting logically, based on what it could see, but not coordinated, not aligned, not unified. They're fragmenting, Varen said quietly. Kareth nodded. Yes, not collapsing, not yet. Fragmenting. Pratt expanded the data view. Decision timelines. Movement patterns. Command responses. Division 3 adjusted position based on outdated orders, she said. Division 7 delayed response awaiting confirmation. Division 11 advanced briefly, then halted after receiving conflicting signals. She paused. Then, none of those decisions are incorrect. That was the problem. They weren't failing. They were misaligning. The enemy had always operated as a single system, a unified structure, every movement calculated, every response synchronized. Now, they were acting as individuals, and they had no experience doing that. Kareth folded his hands behind his back. How long? He asked. Pratt didn't answer immediately. She ran projections, recalculations, Simulations. Then, degradation curve is accelerating, she said. Estimated compounding error threshold, 24 to 36 hours. And after that? Pratt looked at him. For the first time, she said carefully, their decision-making becomes unreliable. Silence. Because that had never happened before. Another transmission came through. Enemy internal channel. Unencrypted. Urgent. Kareth turned. Translation. The analyst read quickly. They're requesting confirmation of command authority, he said. From who? Kareth asked. The analyst hesitated. Multiple sources, he said. That mattered. 'Cause it meant they didn't know who to trust. Another message. Then another. Each one slightly different. Each one asking for clarity, for confirmation, for alignment, and not receiving it. Pratt leaned back slightly. They're repeating themselves, she said. Kareth looked at her. What? The messages, she said. They're reissuing the same instructions. Why? She paused. Then, to reestablish certainty. That hit harder than anything else. 'Cause it meant they knew something was wrong, but they didn't know how to fix it. And then, the broadcast changed. The Bastion's edge was still transmitting, still speaking, still using their language. But the message was different now. Shorter, sharper, direct. The translation came through slowly, carefully, because every word mattered. The analyst read it aloud. You are operating without full information. Your systems are not functioning as expected. Your outcomes are no longer predictable. A pause. Then, this will continue. The room was completely silent. Then the final line. You can choose to stop now. Kareth felt it. Not as strategy, as pressure. Because this was no longer disruption. This was communication. Direct. Intentional. Targeted. They're not just interfering, Varen said quietly. Kareth nodded. No, he said. They're making a point. Pratt looked at the data again. At the broken patterns. At the hesitation spreading through the enemy's structure. They've never dealt with this, she said. No, Kareth replied. And that matters. Because an enemy that had always known what to do, now didn't. An enemy that had always moved forward, now hesitated. An enemy that had always operated with certainty, now questioned. And uncertainty, in a system built entirely on predictability, was not just a weakness. It was a fracture. The first real mistake happened on hour 31. It was small, almost invisible. A division repositioned slightly out of alignment. Not enough to expose it. Just enough to create a gap. Another division adjusted to compensate. But their timing was off. A third division reacted, based on outdated information. The gap widened. Not dramatically, but enough. Kareth saw it immediately. Mark that, he said. Pratt highlighted it. Then tracked the ripple. Because that one mistake did not stay isolated. It spread. Subtly. Quietly. Inevitably. They're compounding, she said. Kareth nodded. Yes. Because they didn't know how not to. They had never needed to recover from this kind of failure before. Hours passed. The pattern continued. Mistakes. Corrections. More mistakes. Wider corrections. Each one logical. Each one justified. Each one making the system less stable. Then, it happened. The eastern flank issued a full halt command. Simultaneously. Across all divisions. Not delayed. Not fragmented. Unified. Clear. Immediate. Kareth stared at the display. They stopped, Varen said. Yes, Kareth replied. They did. The line, which had moved forward for 60 years, was now completely still. Pratt's voice came again, quieter this time. Sir, northern and central flanks are slowing further. Kareth watched. He didn't speak, because he understood what he was seeing. Not retreat. Not yet. But doubt. And doubt, in an enemy that had never experienced it, was more powerful than any weapon. A new transmission arrived. Priority diplomatic channel. All eyes turned. Kareth didn't move. "Read it," he said. The communications officer hesitated. Then, "It's from the enemy command." Silence. Because that had never happened. Not once. In 60 years. "What does it say?" Kareth asked. The officer read carefully. Slowly. Because even he understood. This mattered. "We request discussion regarding temporary cessation of advance operations." He paused. Then finished. "Pending resolution of current operational conditions." No one spoke. No one moved. Because what they had just heard was not defeat, not surrender, not even negotiation. It was something far more important. It was hesitation. And for the first time in 60 years, the enemy was no longer certain they would win. Kareth looked at the display, at the line, still, unmoving, uncertain, and quietly, almost to himself, he said, "They're thinking." That was the moment. Not when the systems failed. Not when the line stopped. Not even when the message arrived. When an enemy that had never needed to think twice, finally did. The line did not surge forward. That was the first decision. And it was not an easy one. "Orders, sir?" Selvar asked. His voice carried something Kareth had not heard in a long time. Expectation. Possibility. Hope. The kind that had been absent from the war for decades. Kareth stood at the center of the command deck, looking at the projection. At the halted enemy line. At the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts beginning to appear along its edges. They were pulling back. Not dramatically. Not chaotically. Deliberately. Carefully. System by system. "Orders, sir?" Selvar repeated. Kareth did not answer immediately, because he understood something now that he had not understood before. Victory was not the same as reversal, and this was not a moment for aggression. It was a moment for control. "We hold position," he said. Selvar blinked. "Sir, they're withdrawing." "I see that. If we advance now." "No." The word was quiet. Final. Selvar stopped. Not because he agreed. Because he recognized the tone. Kareth didn't turn. Didn't explain. Not right away. "We are not here to chase them," he said after a moment. "We are here to change the outcome." A pause. Then, "The outcome has changed." That was the distinction. Not destruction. Not dominance. Direction. Across the projection, the red began to recede. Slowly. Measured. Controlled. The enemy was not collapsing. They were choosing to move. And that choice mattered more than any forced retreat ever could. 3 hours later, confirmation came. All sectors. Full withdrawal pattern. Not a feint. Not a reposition. A decision. The room did not erupt. There was no shouting. No celebration. Just stillness. Because everyone present understood exactly what they were watching. Not a battle being won. A war being rewritten. The Bastion's edge returned on day 13. This time, they saw it arrive. Or at least, they saw it become visible. Which, Varen noted in his report, was not the same thing. It appeared at the edge of the formation. Not emerging. Not jumping. Simply resolving. As if it had decided to exist in a way that could be observed. "Contact confirmed," Selvar said. Kareth nodded once. "Open channel." The connection established instantly. "Admiral," Commander Voss said. Same tone. Same calm. As if nothing had happened. "It worked," Kareth said. It was not a question. "I know," she replied. A pause. Then, "The enemy has opened a diplomatic channel," he said. "I'm aware." Of course she was. "The assembly will begin negotiations." Good. No excitement. No pride. Just acknowledgement. Kareth hesitated. Just slightly. Then asked the question that had been sitting with him since the beginning. "Was there ever a point," he said, "where this didn't work?" A longer pause this time. Then, "No. Not arrogance. Not certainty born from ignorance. Something else. Something quieter. We spent a long time making sure of that." The channel closed. The negotiations lasted 9 days. They were precise, measured, difficult. The enemy did not concede easily. They did not surrender. They did not admit defeat. That was not how they operated. But they talked. And that was everything. For 60 years, they had not needed to. Now, they did. The final agreement was not perfect. It wasn't meant to be. Lines were redrawn, territories disputed, conditions established, frameworks built, but the advance stopped. And for the first time in 2 generations, the future was not a straight line toward loss. 3 days after the agreement was signed, the question arrived, came through formal channels, carefully worded, reviewed, revised, approved, sent. Request for clarification. How many vessels of the Bastion's Edge classification are currently in service? Kareth read it once, then again, then a third time, because he understood what was being asked. Not the number, the implication. How much of this exists? How much more could you do? How far does this go? The response took 48 hours. When it arrived, it was one line. Enough. Kareth stared at the word. He had expected a number, prepared for one, braced for something large, or small, or alarming, but not this, because enough was not a measurement. It was a statement. It did not describe quantity. It defined sufficiency. He looked out across the void, to where the Bastion's Edge had held position, to where it had vanished, to where it had returned. One ship, not because that was all they had, but because that was all they needed. A soft tone sounded behind him. Incoming channel. Soren. Kareth accepted. You've seen the response, she said. Yes. A pause. What do you think it means? She asked. Kareth considered that, carefully. Then, I think, he said slowly, that they've been waiting. For what? For us, he said. Another pause. To fail, Soren said. No, Kareth replied. To try everything else first. Silence. Then, that's unsettling, she said. Kareth watched the stars. Watched the empty space where something impossible had changed everything. No, he said quietly. It's reassuring. Reassuring. Yes. He turned slightly, looking back at the projection. At the map. Still red in many places. Still unfinished. Still uncertain. But different. Because it means, he said, that when the situation required more. A pause. Then, they built for it. The channel closed. Far beyond the edge of the system. The Bastion's Edge was already gone. Not fleeing. Not hiding. Waiting. As it always had. And if the line ever started moving the wrong way again, it would return. Not with force. Not with numbers. But with exactly what was required. No more. No less. Enough.